And welcome back to another edition of the CBB Review Studio podcast. I am Dan Siegel, joined by Mat Mlodzinski and Ben Anderson, my co-hosts. We are back with another recap of a week in college basketball here on Sunday, January 7th, live at noon. And we have now decreased the number of undefeated teams this year from 3 to 1, with Ole Miss and James Madison both falling for the first time yesterday. Not surprising entirely, but it had to happen at some point. So now Houston remains the only undefeated team. Guys, what do you guys say to that? Start with you, Matt.
Yeah, I think that of the three, obviously Houston is the most deserving. I will give Ole Miss a lot of credit. Chris Beard has come in there and changed the program around in a jiffy. I mean, they have went from bottom of the SEC to near the top, but I think that it's still going to need a little bit more. Obviously, Tennessee, the cream of the crop in the SEC, and James Madison, a team that has shown how to win. Kind of skated by in the first couple games of the season. They started to blow teams out more of late, but Sun Belt is an underrated conference. So, obviously James Madison is going to have some bumps in the road, but Houston seems like a legit Final Four team. I wasn't sure heading into the season, but why doubt Kelvin Sampson? Because he just gets it figured out every year.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember last week we did our predictions on who would be the last team, and I think that we both said Houston, I believe, just simply because James Madison had a couple of potential downfalls in the Sun Belt, which is a better league than I think a lot of people give it credit for. They found one of them in Southern Miss. Andre Curbelo strikes again, right? But Houston, I think, is probably the second best team in the country right now behind Purdue. I think that Kansas may be ranked there simply because they haven't lost and they have a couple of better wins. But if we took them on a neutral floor right now, I'm not sure I would like anyone other than the Cougars.
Fair enough. Let's get into our winners and losers of the week. So I will start with my winner of the week, and I'm going to go with North Carolina and their postseason stock, because we went into the year. Well, first off, we looked at last year and the Tar Heels, again, having all that preseason hype. I believe they were number 1 overall in the preseason, and then they didn't make the NCAA tournament. So we're like, why are we going to give them all this credit once again? We were a little more skeptical, and for good reason. But I think they addressed pretty much every single one of their concerns from last year going into this one. First off, they are a great shooting team, shooting over 36% from beyond the arc this year. But also, offensively, they're not relying on that great shooting because they have gone back to running their offense through Armando Bacot. They're All-American, and now – their defense has been so much better lately. This weekend, they showed that not only can they win the shootouts, but they could also win the grinded out games. They won 2 of them on the road this week, actually, both of them by double digits. Pitt, which they pretty much handled, and then Clemson, they pulled away at the end. So this North Carolina team, 2 All-American caliber players, with Davis being the other one. They got Harrison Ingram, who's that true X-factor player, in my opinion. We talked about Pete Nance and him being kind of there, but not entirely what they needed. I think Harrison Ingram, the transfer from Stanford, is exactly that. And the odds makers have taken notice. The championship odds for North Carolina were plus 3,500 in the preseason. They're as low as plus 2,500 now. So North Carolina postseason stock is my winner of the week. What say you, Matt?
I'm going to something real close to my heart here for this one, and that is New Jersey basketball. I don't think I have to speak any further that Seton Hall was the team of the week. I'm a very proud alum. I don't need to talk much about the Pirates. A lot of people know what they did this week, knocking off number 23 Providence at the AMP, a place where Providence seems to be pretty strong there, and then taking that back home to Newark, New Jersey, and taking down number 7 Marquette. Seton Hall now owns 2 top 10 wins, 3 quad 1 wins, a team that it's hard to believe is still only 73rd in the net, I think has become almost a lock. I have them in the tournament as now. By a lock, I mean at this point in the season, obviously a lot of work to do still. But Seton Hall is not the only team. We've got a Princeton team, fellas, that's 13-1. They only lost 1 game this season by 4 to a St. Joseph's team that is, many people know, knocked off Villanova. So Princeton needs to be taken just as seriously this year. as they were last year, a team that knocked off Arizona in the NCAA tournament. Monmouth off to a 1-0 start in the Coastal Athletic Association, not the Colonial anymore. It's the Coastal. They beat Towson, so they're getting off to a good start. And St. Peter's, yeah, you guys remember them? They're 3-0 in the MAAC. Obviously, Shaheen Holloway, now the coach of Seton Hall, but clearly doesn't matter. The Peacocks still find ways to win, and their last win was by 12 over Iona. This is an Iona team coached by Tobin Anderson, a program that has had some great coaches over the years, so maybe St. Peter's isn't going to fall off after all.
Yeah, New Jersey basketball has gained a lot of respect due to their tournament performances in specific over the last couple years. One team that really isn't holding their end of the bargain is the Rutgers Scarlet Knights, but overall, great for New Jersey basketball. You love to see it as myself, someone who has grown up close to New Jersey. Ben, what's your weekly winner?
Yeah, so mine's similar to yours, Dan. It's taking Tobacco Road as a whole and looking at the start of their ACC conference play. There are only 3 teams left that are undefeated in the conference, and they're North Carolina State, and Wake Forest. And the lone Tobacco Road member that we haven't mentioned is Duke, and they're 2-1, so that's tied for second. It's a really strong start for all 3 of those teams in particular. In Wake Forest in particular is a real surprise to me. I didn't think they're going to be this good this quickly, but they're 3-0 with a big win over Miami this past Saturday. In addition, North Carolina, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but they defeated Clemson without having their best game, which I thought was really strong for how we can perceive them, like you mentioned, Dan, going forward and as a tournament prospect. And then finally, NC State starting off undefeated in conference play is huge for Kevin Keats. And even though they haven't beat necessarily the top of the conference, I'm still buying stock in the Wolfpack so far.
Me too, yeah. Well, I've talked about Wake Forest. I'll talk about them a little bit more later in my ACC part of Around the Conferences. But let's get into the losers of the week. So my loser is not a team or a player or a coach. I'm going with AP poll voters. And I'm not going to be like nitpicky, like, oh, this team is 7 and should be 10. This team is 12 and should be like 16. I'm not going with that. But the general mentality of the voters, I feel like needs to be changed. I appreciate them trying to give so-called mid-major schools respect, but they're absolutely doing it the wrong way, right? Florida Atlantic, they put them in at 17 so they could say, oh, look at that, we're ranking a mid-major. They had 3 bad resume losses, lost the additional one to Charlotte. So if they're still ranked this week, I have no idea what to say. Gonzaga, I don't know why they were still ranked with 4 losses, and was their best win, like Syracuse on a neutral site? I don't know. I like how they think they want to be ranking mid-major schools, but rank actual mid-majors that deserve it, right? Rank the Aztecs, who have a better resume, and beat Gonzaga head-to-head. Rank Nevada, maybe. Show some love to, I don't know, like even the really lower major leagues, like Grand Canyon University. I stuck them at 25 because they have only 1 loss and a couple of, I think, quad 2, edge of quad 1 wins. So I get it. Like you have your like preconceived biases, and confirmation bias is a real thing, but just watch the games, look at the resumes. I don't understand. So just the mentality of the AP poll voters. I know the AP poll doesn't mean too much, so I'm not going to complain too much more, but just one little segment on that. Matt, what's your loser of the week?
Well, first off, a winner, the CBB review poll, better than the AP poll, in my opinion. You guys check that out every Monday morning. My weekly loser is a coach who hasn't necessarily been on the hot seat, but he has kind of, there's been grumblings on how can Brad Brownell, what can he bring Clemson to? Clemson's been a team that, in my opinion, has been at the top half of the ACC over, the past few years. It's clearly a Clemson team that is a Clemson program that is dominated by football, but basketball has taken over recently. Here's the thing. Clemson had a tremendous non-conference slate. This was a team that nearly ran through everyone in their non-conference, beat Davidson, Boise State. Those are a couple good high mid-major schools. They were able to win at Alabama by 8, almost knocked off Memphis on the road as well. Now they have a week, this past week, where they play at Miami and against North Carolina at home. At the very least, a chance to go 1-1 and kind of solidify themselves and say, hey, we belong in the ACC. You're playing a Final Four team from last year, and a team that played the national championship the year before. These are programs that mean a lot to the ACC and to the country as a whole. Clemson did not have their best week. I don't think they're going to look at this week and be happy about it. Lose by 12 at Miami. Okay, road game. Let's regroup. Let's get home. One of our biggest home games of the year against North Carolina. What happens? Well, they lose to the Tar Heels by 10. The issue here isn't about losing both games. The issue is about kind of how it happened and how this team just played so much worse than they have been. Giving up 95 points to Miami, that's a problem. 60 points in the second half for the Hurricanes. I know this is a great offensive team, but come on, you got to be able to defend a little bit. Then they defend against North Carolina, but they don't score the ball. They score 55 points. Joe Girard III, 1 for 10 from the field. This is a guy that's supposed to be scoring 15 points a game for this Clemson team. So if I'm a Clemson fan, I'm a little bit disappointed in what my team just did this past week because I think there was a real chance for people to buy into Clemson. I don't know if everyone has caught on to the Tigers just yet. I still think they're a great team. I still think they're a team you need to prepare for, but I'm starting to lose confidence in them and Brad Brownell's job to actually get the most of these guys because he has a very talented, if not his most talented group as the head coach of Clemson, and he's not really showing it lately.
Yeah, nothing really to add there. You really hit it all there, Matt. But Ben, to end off this segment, what is your loser of the week?
Yeah, this is probably the biggest story on Saturday of the college basketball world, but it's TCU. Now, I will say that TCU stole a game against Georgetown right earlier in the season on a bad call. So maybe losing to Kansas on the road with a collection of maybe not so great calls probably evens things out a little bit in the scoreboard for them. But I don't think any particular call was completely awful. Like, I get why it was called a flagrant one. If you're not familiar, TCU was up 2. They stole the ball. They were looking to probably break away and score, put the game up 4 against Kansas. But the play was stopped because Hunter Dickinson was elbowed by, I believe, Emmanuel Miller. They go back and they call it a flagrant one. Kansas gets the ball and the win. They seal it and Fog Allen. I get why they called it a flagrant one. I probably wouldn't have, but I understand why. I think my bigger issue with the play was that they stopped the play on a fast break. Usually they let him run out. And if TCU scores, even if it's gone back and called a flagrant one, they probably still win because they're up 4 instead of up 2. Then you have Hunter Dickinson probably pushed off a little. That doesn't really get called all that much. Probably traveled. But he ends up scoring. I think it's just the collection of them together in the last minute that would really not sit well with me if I were a Horned Frogs fan or Jamie Dixon. But that's Kansas. That's Kansas at home, and that's the Big 12 generally. So that's a tough way to lose a conference game that you probably should have won. But there goes Horned Frogs, and they're probably even in the ref size now.
You and Bill Raftery both. I mean, he was livid on that broadcast. That was really fun to see. Raft is a legend, and I always respect what he has to say. So fair enough there. Anyways, let's get into our scores from last week in specific. So some more big games that we picked last week. And yeah, I mean, my dreadful season continues. Ben, you went 5-2 this week. So you're 2 games ahead of Matt. And yeah, so let's get to these games. So we start with Illinois and Northwestern. Illinois 30-piecing the Wildcats. This was a game where Matt and I we recapped or we previewed this game going into the week, and we said we were questionable about Illinois, right? Because of the whole Terrence Shannon situation. He's not going to be playing with them for the foreseeable future. Do they have that alpha offensive player? Well, Marcus Domask proves us wrong. 32 points, 6 assists in this one. Illinois did lose a close game to Purdue later in the week, but they came back in that game. They were down by a lot for a while, and I think they showed they're still a real quality team. I think they will be able to get inside maybe the 4 to 5 seed range by the time we get to March. Northwestern, on the other hand, I don't know. They're clinging on to that Purdue win right now. I don't really see much else besides that one single game performance that's making me excited about the Wildcats. But Matt, I'll throw it to you next. Where do you want to go? I think you're muted over there on the mic.
Good call. Good call. Good call. You hit it right on the mark there, Dan. Nothing more much to say there. I mean, Illinois clearly is going to be fine enough where it's not going to be a total drop off. They have enough talent on this team. I'm more worried about Northwestern because this is supposed to be the year of Boo Booey, and it's not really turning out that way. One really good win against Purdue. So we can't throw out Northwestern yet out of the conversation, but we can start to question what their overall ability will be. I want to turn it to the Oregon-Washington game because Washington's a team that I looked at probably only a month ago and said this could be one of the best teams in the Pac-12. And here they are sitting just picking up their first conference win over the weekend. So Oregon, a team that on the other end has, I mean, they're undefeated in Pac-12 play. This is a Ducks team that's 4-0 in the Pac-12. I know they don't have any resume wins yet, but I think that it's time to start looking at this Oregon team seriously. Jackson Shelstad is a legitimate point guard. He does everything for this Ducks team. One of my friends is a Ducks fan. He told me about him. I'm like, sure, let's see what he does. And he was spot on with that because Shelstad is he's one of the most underrated players in the country right now. And I think he's going to catch on more and more as this Ducks team rises up.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought up that Oregon-Washington game. I was a believer in Oregon in the preseason. They had a lot of moving parts, and I wasn't sure which parts of those would succeed. But Shelstad didn't really play in the beginning of the season. He posted a DNP for the first 4 games, and then Dan Altman was like, all right, we're going to play this freshman, and now he's arguably their best player. It was really impressive to see a true freshman, especially playing point guard, come out and win. They swept the Washington schools over the weekend, and now they've also swept the California schools, USC and UCLA, to start 4-0. So it's not like they're beating up against the bottom of the league necessarily. Those teams still have a lot of talent. I want to talk about Creighton versus Providence real quick, since we already touched on North Carolina at Clemson. Creighton didn't really shoot that well this game. They shot just 7 for 23 from on the arc, and they had a negative assist to turnover ratio. So the fact that they still beat a Providence team who doesn't have Bryce Hopkins, of course, granted, but still a pretty solid squad, I think speaks well to what they can provide for the Big East. Ryan Kalkbrenner is arguably the most solid player in all of college basketball. I turn on the TV and I've watched the exact same high-level game pretty much every single time, even if he's slightly injured, even if he's, not producing at the highest level. He still finishes with, what do you have today, 22 and 12. It's just a really impressive player, I think, and probably the most important player to their team in the Big East, I would say, with the exception of maybe Tyler Kolek at Marquette. I just think he's had a really great season so far, so I wanted to shout him out. As for Providence, not really worried about them. It's a tough place to play on the road. At Creighton in Nebraska, right? You're in conference, but you're flying 3 hours to get there. So I sort of get it. It's not the end of the world for the Friars. I still think they're going to have a good season. But I think Creighton proved to me that they can win even not having their best offensive game.
Yeah, I mean, with both of those teams, I think the bench is an issue. And it was specific in this game. I think there were like single-digit bench points total between both of those teams in that game. I think Creighton just has the better core, the better lineup. I'm not really sure. I'm in on Providence. They will be involved in our game picks, I believe, this week. So I'll talk about that more there. But let's go Colorado, New Mexico next. Or Colorado State, New Mexico, I should say. So Colorado State winning this one 76-68. Really, there were 3 or 4 really entertaining Mountain West Conference games this week. Isaiah Stevens, though, for Colorado State, just wanted to shout him out. He's truly one of the best players in the country that nobody besides like college basketball diehards really know. And you should know him because he's averaging 18 points per game, 7.5 assists this year on extremely efficient numbers. Field goal percentage well over 50%. 3-point percentage is close to 50%. That this guy is incredible. Just turn on the TV if you're up late watching college basketball after dark because Isaiah Stevens is incredible. Dayton and Davidson, I think it's becoming more and more clear that it's Dayton's league to lose. I don't think they will run the table in this conference. There's definitely games that they will lose, but if we're power ranking the A10, there's no reason Dayton shouldn't be number 1. And then if either of you want to touch on Auburn, Arkansas, or piggyback on anything I just said.
Yeah, I will piggyback real quick on Colorado State because this is a team that just lost to Utah State last night. Mind you, a Utah State team that is now 14-1. And in my opinion, they are well within the bracket. Utah State has no worries at all. And I feel like some people are going to drop Colorado State in the rankings, whatever that means. It obviously doesn't mean much, but let's not forget that this is a Colorado State team that had to play New Mexico and Utah State back-to-back. Arguably the two teams, along with San Diego State, competing at the top of this Mountain West. A very tough schedule for the Rams this week. They went out 1-1, and I think that is a very good way to handle this week. But I'm going to move on, excuse me, to the Auburn-Arkansas game, because Auburn's a team that competed with Baylor in the first start of the season. I think it was even the first week of the season. Almost beat the Bears. Bears come out with the win. Everyone starts to talk about how good this Baylor team is. And I've talked about Auburn a little bit on this show, but I want to talk a little bit more about them because this is a 32-point win over one of the best transfer portal class, sought-after teams in Arkansas in the country. Eric Musselman gets transfers to play for the Razorbacks. Auburn, on the other hand, being coached by Bruce Pearl, a fiery guy, someone who, not in the respect of Brad Brownell that I talked about with Clemson earlier, but what level can he bring this Auburn team to? Last year, an Auburn team plays Iowa in the first round, and I thought they played really well, but it obviously wasn't an Auburn team that was going to go far. I think that it's changing this year. I think this is a top team in the SEC, right behind Kentucky and Tennessee in Tier 1. I think Auburn is closer to that top than people realize, and this win over Arkansas is start of the proof. We need a little bit more, but that's a real good start.
Yeah, the metrics love Auburn. They're top 5 team currently at Torvik, which is really impressive. Alabama and Auburn are both top 5 teams in the country, according to the computers, which is a little shocking to me. But I do think Auburn's really good. I do think they're probably a top 4 team in the SEC. I think right now, as we speak, I think that's a fair point to say. On Arkansas side, I think they got to figure out their rotations. I know they've had injuries. I know they've had like eligibility issues with Menafield, particular, right, stuff like that. But they have 11 players who have played 20% or more of their available minutes, which is not how you win in college basketball. I think any coach would say that they'd rather have an 8-man rotation or less, right? With 5 known quantities in the starting roles. So I think this is how pretty much Musselman has always played his rosters, right? He always has a lot of guys playing a lot of minutes, but 11 I think is a little bit unsustainable. And I think that in order for the Razorbacks to achieve a little bit more success, they probably need to find their guys and start playing them a little more than they have so far.
Valid there. Okay, let's get into around the conferences. So Power 6, we are also going to add the Mountain West into the Pac-12 report here because, Matt, you said it last week. I think we both agree, like they're the same status, if not greater than some of these power conference leagues we're about to talk about. But we're going to start with my conference right now. We're going to start with the ACC. So I talked about, or we all talked about the UNC Clemson game. UNC now 3-0. I think they're the clear best team in the conference right now, the team to beat. North Carolina State, though, also 3-0, like Ben talks about, survived that scare from Notre Dame with DJ Burns getting the game-tying and game-winning bucket. And then they go on and smoke UVA at home. Notre Dame, I mean, they are starting to kind of figure out how to be competitive in these games. They were competitive against Duke. And before this week, they smoked UVA. We talked about that last week. Like, here's the thing. Notre Dame is definitely going to play in the first day, the pillow fight day of the ACC tournament. But I think they are rising above Louisville level bad. We're seeing some sort of progress in this Micah Shrewsbury program. He's laying the foundation, so to speak. UVA, on the other hand, they are just dreadful offensively. Specifically on the road, the home road splits are kind of insane. And this might be a team, in my opinion, that's similar to that 2021 to 2022 season where we see them in the NIT because there's not one clear problem. Like most UVA teams, maybe outside of that one year that they won it all, there was one clear problem with UVA. You you could diagnose it. If they just did this thing better, they'd be perfect. They'd be a really elite team. This year, it's just, I think in all facets, they're just not good enough. And it's frustrating as a UVA fan, but that's just the way it is. A couple other teams to keep an eye on. Talked about Wake Forest, 3-0. They were my dark horse team in the ACC last episode. And with the impressive wins at BC and then versus Miami, just a team that's so much better since November. And maybe on a more negative note, I'll end off the segment with Pitt, who is 1-2 in conference. The results this week, I guess not too significant. They lost to UNC in a game that, wasn't a blowout, wasn't too competitive, kind of in betweener as you would expect. And then they beat Louisville in kind of a similar type of game. I just, overall, eye test wise, they don't look too dangerous in general. I'm starting to think this Jeff Capel era was just a one-year wonder, and I don't know if he lasts too much longer in Pittsburgh. So that is the ACC. Let's bring it back to you, Matt, with your conference, the Big East.
Big East, obviously I talked a little bit about Seton Hall a little bit earlier, so I'm going to transition this to a different type of way that I do these takeaways. Usually I kind of go through each team, at least most of the teams, and talk about what they did this week. Instead, I'm going to bring the attention to the Big East preseason poll. A Big East preseason poll that had the Butler Bulldogs picked 10th and the Seton Hall Pirates picked 9th. And to even go further, the Providence Friars picked 7th. And now Providence, obviously, the season changes a lot because Bryce Hopkins goes down for the season with a torn ACL. But up until that point, Providence was outperforming their expectations so much. This was not the 7th pick team in the Big East. This was a top 4 team in the Big East. I think even still, with the fight that they put up on the road at Creighton, it's a very dangerous Friars team that isn't going to go away easily. Excuse me. Seton Hall. What can you say much more about the Pirates? This team was picked 9th in the Big East. They now own wins over Marquette and UConn, arguably the 2 best teams in the conference. So Seton Hall, not the number 9 team in the Big East. I think we can all agree on that. A long season ahead. Maybe they're still only like 6th, 7th, or even 8th, but it's a more competitive team, especially with the top tier than we would have thought. I would argue tier 2. This is not a tier 1 team, but I think at this point we can say that Seton Hall is a tier 2 team in the Big East, bunched in with that whole Villanova, St. John's, even Creighton kind of group. And then there's Butler, picked 10th to finish in the Big East. I know a lot had to do with last year's team that didn't do too well under Thad Matta, his first year back with Butler. But this is now a Butler team that's 10-4, and I know they're without Donovan Clingan, but they gave UConn all they could handle inside Hinkle Fieldhouse. Butler was in control of that game for a lot of the game. So, honestly, I know preseason expectations don't mean a lot, but overall did not hit the mark in the Big East as the Big East poll voters usually do. Usually there's a good grasp on this conference. Maybe one team changes the opinion, but right now it's looking like the conference as a whole is better than expected, and some of these teams at the bottom are a lot better than expected, and it's the Big East. It just makes it fun.
Yeah. I mean, when I was covering that UConn versus Seton Hall game in the Prudential Center, I think Shaheen Holloway said it like he put it simple. This is the Big East, and it is very, very difficult to win road games in this conference, no matter who is playing who. We are seeing that very clearly. Ben, take us away with your Big 12 takeaways for this week.
Yeah, absolutely. One day in particular matters, and it was yesterday. That's when the Big 12 opened conference play, and you could immediately see that despite the addition of 4 new teams, it was still going to be as tough of a league as ever, 1 through 14. One game that I think probably flew under the radar just because it was late night that I want to bring up is Cincinnati defeating BYU on the road. That was a really impressive win for Wes Miller. I thought that BYU is a really solid team, especially at home, right? They have a really great home court advantage, in my opinion, one of the most underrated in the country. But Cincinnati walked in and defeated them behind Nell, who scored 27 points on 9 of 14 from three-point shooting. That's going to win you a lot of games, right? If you are Cincinnati, if you're the Bearcats. We already mentioned the TCU game. Going into Kansas and almost defeating the Jayhawks on the road is always going to be a win for Jamie Dixon, despite the circumstances. Oklahoma, I thought, had the most important win of the day for the Big 12, defeating Iowa State at home. Those are two teams that we don't really know a lot about still. So to have that win in your back pocket, I think is really important. I still do think Iowa State is a good team, though. I think they're going to be dangerous for whoever they play. Then finally, Texas Tech goes on the road and defeats Texas in a game that I watched basically all of. I think that they were the Red Raiders were the better team the entire way through. Joe Toussaint and Pop Isaacs had really great games in the backcourt, arguably outplaying Max Abmas and Tyrese Hunter, which were thought to be the strength of the Longhorns team. I don't expect Texas to be ranked in the AP poll coming out tomorrow, but if they are, more content for you, Dan, I guess, right? But it's a tough league overall. Really interesting. I think anyone can beat anyone with the exception of maybe West Virginia, who's not having a great start to their season. Houston demolished them, but really just it is what the Big 12 always is. So I think that's really impressive.
Yeah, no, agreed. And I think that the Texas concerns are really starting to come into fruition. We thought, well, I don't know how great they'll be this year because in the Big 12, you can't just on any given night say, oh, my guards will outplay your guards, and that'll happen, and we'll be very successful in the conference. So that's kind of what's happening with Texas. We move on to the next conference I will do, which is the SEC. A couple of key results, specific games that we have not discussed yet. So I guess I alluded to this a little bit, but Tennessee smoking Ole Miss 90-64. Not an absolute shocking result, but just reinforces the fact that Tennessee has a lot of offensive upside. And again, rest in peace to Ole Miss's perfect season. We will await how they do against that middle chunk of the SEC. They have a bunch of games against like that big middle tier coming up. We'll see after maybe 5 or 6 conference games where we could truly place them accurately. And then Kentucky surviving Florida 87-85. I thought both teams showed a good bit in this one. Florida is clearly improved. Florida is a tournament team, in my opinion. The only thing that's holding them back is probably losing to Virginia at home right now. But that was really early on. I think they have progressed since then. And for Kentucky, same story. Youth shines again. They come through. Second half comeback. Reeves with 19, Shepherd with 14. Everybody has played just one game so far in the SEC. So it's not like we have as much of a clear picture. I believe the Big East, everyone's played like 4 games. So it's a little bit clearer there. But I think the knowns remain. You have your top tier, Tennessee, Kentucky, in whatever order you want to put it. And then there's Auburn, and you could argue Alabama, Florida, maybe. But I think A&M is now gone from there after getting handled by LSU. I don't think you could put A&M there anymore. And South Carolina and Ole Miss, those are the teams like we know they're going to regress to a certain extent. They're both 13-1 right now. The question is, how much do they regress? Because there's a wide range of different possibilities. We were not really particularly high on South Carolina, and not really Ole Miss either going into the season. 13-1. We'll see how they do in conference play. So that is the SEC. Let's throw it back to Matt, who will give us our West Coast recap.
Yeah, well, we'll start with the Pac-12. I do think the Pac-12 is a good conference, but as far as top-heavy goes, there's only one team that you can really count on, and that's Arizona, an Arizona team that won by 50 pretty much over Colorado. So Arizona, the clear and away favorite in the Pac-12. This is a team that there's just so much to like about this team. I know they've had a few bumps. So people weren't sure, okay, are the Wildcats? Yeah, they're a Final Four contender. This is still the team that we thought they were a month ago. Teams are allowed a few losses, guys. It's a long schedule out there. It's a long season. It's okay to have a few losses, even if there's 1 or 2 that are shaky. I'm concerned about a couple of teams. I want to start with Utah. They've lost 2 straight. They had the gauntlet of playing 2 Arizona teams on the road this past week, but they lost them both, and it wasn't pretty. I mean, you're losing by 12 to Arizona State and by almost 20 to Arizona. This is a Utah team that I thought was right up there as the second best team in the Pac-12 potentially. Now I'm having some thoughts. I watched the game against Arizona State. Utah does not play as physical as I would like them to. And I think that's a downfall for them, especially if they get that matchup in the NCAA tournament, because I still think it's a tournament team. Colorado, as I just mentioned, I mean, this is a team that's losing at Arizona by 47 points. Now, they almost took down Arizona State, almost had a bounce back, but we still have to look at the fact that the Buffaloes have lost 2 straight teams, and I'm not really sure what this resume is anymore. I mean, this was a team that was ranked during the season, and they fell out because they lost to Florida State. That's not a good loss. Florida State is not an NCAA tournament team. They've improved since last year, but that's going to hurt Colorado. This Arizona State loss might hurt Colorado as well, because I'm going to transition into them. They are 4-0 in the Pac-12, but I am still not sold on Arizona State. Frankie Collins is physical. He plays very well. Jose Perez is eccentric. He also plays well, but he's a flashy player. He's fun to watch, but he needs to play a little more consistent for Arizona State for my liking. But still, they've won 4 straight games, 2 of those against Utah and Colorado. So maybe the Sun Devils are better than I thought. I still need to see more, though, because I'm just not sold on the brand of basketball that they play. And then UCLA. What are we doing here? I mean, a 6-win UCLA team. 6 wins. Chicago State, I saw, has more wins than UCLA. And I know Chicago State's played about 70 games this season because, they're independents. They got to get them all done. But still, we see a Bruins team that is 6-9. The marquee win for UCLA through 15 games is a road win at the Oregon State Beavers. 15 games. That's your best win, Oregon State. A lot going on in UCLA. No surprise they lost a ton of talent from last year. I'm a little surprised they weren't able to bring in a little bit more. I mean, you kind of looked at this team and thought this might happen with a Dembona, a center who's not even like a dominant scorer as their top player. There were concerns coming in. The concerns are right. I'm going to transition to the Mountain West as a whole because I spent a lot of time on the Pac-12. And what I'll say here is it's a fun conference because you've got 6 great teams and 5 teams that don't really matter at all. They're not in the picture. So the top teams are going to keep beating up on each other. We know that. Utah State, San Diego State, Nevada, Colorado State, New Mexico. And I would put Boise State in that conversation as well, based on what they did last year, who they brought back off of that team. The Mountain West is arguably my favorite conference outside of the Big East to follow. There's just so much to like here. Isaiah Stevens, as you guys mentioned, one of the top players that you need to know in college basketball. You want to add another one? Great Asobor, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, on Utah State, just collects rebounds like it's nobody's business. He's a double-double machine. The Aggies are 14-1. They have won 13 straight games. Nevada's won 7 straight games. I could go on and on. The Mountain West is as top-heavy as it gets, and I am here for it.
No, I'm here. I'm here for it as well. That's why we added it to our conference takeaways. Much deserved for the Mountain West. Ben, take us away with the Big Ten to finish this off.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're going to see some tiers starting to form after most teams have played at least 2 games in conference play. Wisconsin is the only team remaining that is undefeated, and the Badgers are now competent on offense. This is a bit of a revelation for the conference. They're 7th offensively, according to Torvik, in the country, which is really impressive. They just dropped nearly 90 on Nebraska as they played. I think this is a really good team. I don't think they got nearly enough credit for what they did in the beginning of the season, whether that's just blowing bad teams out or, they took a couple losses, particularly to Providence, but Providence is better than we all thought they were going to be as well. So the Badgers, I think, are now in that second tier of the conference in the Big Ten. Purdue's tier 1. They beat Illinois in the game of the week for the Big Ten with Zach Edey in foul trouble. Obviously, the Illini didn't have Terrence Shannon, but to still hold on for that victory, I think was pretty impressive. And then that next tier, I think, is only Illinois and Wisconsin. I'm not sure which team is better right now. Illinois has some roster issues, clearly, that they're going to need to figure out at some point in the season. But those 2 teams, I think, are a step above everyone else. And everyone else is, I just don't know how to order them, if I'm being quite honest. It's a bit of a mess from maybe 4 to 13 in that conference, it feels like. Rutgers is pretty bad. Penn State is also pretty bad. But we're not sure about pretty much any other team. Michigan State is coming, right? They were disappointing for a lot of the season, particularly in the beginning, but they're coming. They destroyed Penn State a little bit ago. They play Illinois this week, which we'll mention. So I think that'll be a bit of a checkpoint for them to see if they're actually back or not. I would say Iowa has struggled as well. They're 1-3 in conference. One thing to note is that they've been reliant on a top 10 offense for the past 5 years or so. That is not a top 10 offense this year. And now we're seeing what happens when Iowa doesn't have a top 10 offense.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they are probably not going to make the tournament this year. Shout out to Minnesota having a 2-1 record in the Big Ten. I think a lot of people picked them in the basement to start, but they're a little bit better than people have expected. They went on the road and beat Michigan, who is just, man, they're not having a good season this year, right? 6-8 currently. They're currently playing at at Penn State as we speak. They better win that game, I think. But really, it's a bit of a mess down there in the middle of the Big Ten. Indiana is 3-1, is your only other team within a game of Wisconsin. So Wisconsin, very impressive. Purdue is Purdue. Illinois is Illinois, despite not having Terrence Shannon. And then after that, we might have 8-9 seeds in the NCAA tournament for the Big Ten once again.
Yeah. All right. So we've gone a little bit long on the recap portion, so we'll go a little rapid fire to finish off this episode with the game picks. This will be my 7-0 week where I jump right back into contention here at CBB Review. Let's start with BYU and Baylor. So I'll pick this one first. I think Baylor is going to win this one. I think they do have another, honestly, like that Michigan State style loss where they just absolutely get blown out. That will happen at some point this year because I think they've been playing with their food a little bit too much. And at some point, it's just going to completely come to bite them in the Big 12. This doesn't strike me as one of those games. Simply, I don't think they match up BYU, that is, with Baylor well. In order to beat Baylor, you got to get physical. You got to penetrate. That's the opposite of what that's the opposite of what BYU is going to do. So I'm going to go with Baylor in this one. What about you, Matt?
I'm going to go with Baylor in this one. I mean, just being at home against a BYU team that, didn't really play their greatest, obviously, against Cincinnati. And I feel like this is going to be a rude entrance to what Big 12 play is really all about. Baylor's not an easy place to play. It's a team that has a lot of different options. They're able to, they can really spread the ball out. They've got some shooters on this team. I really like what Scott Drew's been able to build there. And I think, this is welcome to the Big 12 for BYU. Baylor wins.
Yeah, I'll put a sweep there. BYU still has not won a true road game this season yet. They've only played one. They lost to Utah. I don't see that changing against the Bears. Give me Baylor.
Okay, next up we got the North Carolina matchup, UNC versus NC State. Ben, I'll start with you in this one.
I like the I like the Wolfpack here. This was the toughest one of the 7 for me to pick because North Carolina has looked like the better team throughout this entire season. You've mentioned them in their winners, but they always have trouble with the Wolfpack, particularly on the road, particularly when North Carolina is good. They always seem to get tripped up by NC State. So I would like to say that the Wolfpack have that opportunity to make that marquee win to stay undefeated in conference. They haven't had one like Wake Forest and North Carolina has yet, but I believe it comes on Wednesday.
Yeah, you know what? I was going to go North Carolina. Why don't I have some fun with this too? I think North Carolina State will be up for this game. I'm hoping that college is back in session in North Carolina State because this is like their marquee home game of the season. It's a home game against NC State. I believe, they played Duke at home in March, but come on. Like this is the game that Wolfpack fans are going to be up for. They're playing well. They've won 4 straight. They're coming off that win over Virginia. Sorry to you guys about that. I know that kind of hits home, but it's obviously an NC State team that's playing well. And I think their confidence is probably at an all-time high. The way that they finished out that game, the win against Notre Dame, kind of transitioning that into Virginia, give me the Wolfpack in this one. Man, I can't believe I just picked that.
So I am going against the grain by picking North Carolina here. Well, I guess I'll do that. I don't know if I totally see your logic with the series history, Ben, because I feel like it's a pattern where, or I actually looked at it specifically. I looked at the statistics. Like UNC will win by double digits most times, and then every like 4 or 5 times North Carolina State will squeak out a win. But North Carolina State did win their last time. I'm not saying like, oh, the pattern continues. That's my logic there. But I think this is a game where North Carolina, the Tar Heels are getting hot. They figured things out. I think they are battle tested and could win a physical game. DJ Burns will have his, but North Carolina just scores too much. So give me the Heels. Next up, Michigan State at Illinois. We'll start with Matt on this one.
I feel like not having Terrence Shannon will eventually catch up with Illinois. And I feel like this is a game where it could definitely catch up because the Spartans, when it gets down to it, have a lot of guys that can score the basketball. I know that obviously this team as a whole hasn't clicked overall throughout the season, but if Tyson Walker can get hot, if this Michigan State team can live up to what they have, AJ Hoggard, Akins, there's just a lot of options on this team. I feel like they can thrive in this road environment at Illinois and pick up a big win because Michigan State is still playing with their backs against the wall. I know there's a lot of season to go, but they need to start putting some wins together, stringing some good wins together. I think this is one they can take care of.
Ben, go ahead.
I'm going to pick against Matt this time. If this was at the Breslin Center in East Lansing, I probably would have picked the Spartans. But since it's in Illinois, I like the Illini in this game. They have an elite 2-point defense, second in the country by field goal percentage. And that we all know that Michigan State isn't exactly adept at shooting from beyond the arc. So for those reasons, I like Illinois at home to win this one here.
Yeah, I don't know. It's tough because you expect Illinois to regress at some point, and then like Michigan State, they got the questionable resume, but they're clearly getting better. It's kind of like they're starting to trend towards each other, but they will stop at some point. I'm picking the Spartans with kind of Matt's logic. I think this is the game where not having Terrence Shannon starts to catch up with them. Next up, we've got St. John's at Creighton. This is a battle of another pair of analytic darlings that have not gotten it done necessarily as much on the court. St. John's has had a lot of success on the boards, but teams that could match their physicality could beat them on the boards or at least come close to competing with them on the boards have been the ones to have success and beat St. John's this year. For that reason, I'm picking Creighton. Creighton is one of those teams. They have length all around. Pretty much 1 through 5. Everybody rebounds. I like Creighton here. Matt, go ahead.
I also like Creighton here. I know St. John's is coming off a big win over Villanova. Creighton in their own right is coming off a big win over Providence. But again, kind of staying with the theme of the Baylor game, when you're at home in a place like that, and I know I just went against the grain and picked Michigan State to win at Illinois, but Creighton, I've been to Omaha. I know what this environment is like. And that is a dangerous place to play. And like Michigan State, I think Creighton kind of finds themselves in a position where, hey, we can't get comfortable. We need to make sure we're winning some games here. They've kind of fallen out of that first tier in the Big East. Can't be a better way than to win a game on the weekend in Omaha against a St. John's team that's playing some of their best basketball.
I think I'm going to disagree with both of you. I'm going with St. John's on the road, which is dangerous given the performance of road teams in the Big East so far this year. But if we say that Soriano and Kalkbrenner cancel out, which I think is roughly fair, right? I think we can also say that the combination of Denise Jenkins and Jordan Dingle cancel out with Trey Alexander, then I just like St. John's wings more than I like Creighton's wings. I like Shyman's really good, but I like RJ Lewis, which had brought a huge boost to St. John's. In my opinion, he's looked pretty good the past few games. I like Chris Ledlum if he's able to play. I think he can bully whoever's guarding him, probably Mason Miller in the post to get a couple of easy buckets there. I just like the Johnnies in this situation over Creighton, which is a team that I've been lower on generally throughout the year.
Interesting. Okay. And then we've got our next game. We head into Mountain Westland with this one. San Diego State at New Mexico. And I think, Ben, you go first here. Yeah.
Yeah, that should be, I believe, San Diego State -2, not Arizona -2. Slight miscue right there, but I gotta take the Aztecs here. I think they've just shown a little bit more throughout the years, throughout this throughout the season. This is a vintage Mountain West rivalry game dating back to like when Kawhi Leonard was playing at San Diego State. These were always the games that everyone wanted to watch out on the West Coast. So I'm really excited to see it back in full swing here. I just think that Jaden Ledee is so hard to guard, right? Who is that guy on the Lobos that is able to take him? The Aztecs are someone that I can trust more at this point in the season, and they can go on the road and win at New Mexico, which is a notoriously hard place to play, at least in Mountain West by Mountain West standards. Give me the Aztecs on the road.
Yeah, I'll take it from here. I will also take San Diego State. My reasoning here is I've watched New Mexico a few times, and Jalen House and Jamal Mashburn Jr. are two very good players. I think they're good enough to lead this team to the NCAA tournament, and they can be very dangerous, but they take some wild shots. Like they're not afraid to pull the ball, and that can be very, very good. Can also be very, very bad. And for a Brian Dutcher coach San Diego State team, I think it's more so going to be very bad because they're going to force them into those bad shots unless they just catch fire. I think San Diego State and their defensive prowess wins this matchup. And also, just for the note, I mean, after blowing out Colorado by 47 points, I think it's fair to say that Arizona not playing in this game still kind of deserves a 2-point line over both these teams.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm gonna take New Mexico. Actually, I think I honestly do think the Lobos match up well. First off, they're an underrated defensive team because we went into the year thinking that it was just gonna be a team that puts up 90 points a night, but also gives up a little bit defensively. They're actually better rated defensively than offensively. Also, if you've watched some of the New Mexico games, you'll see they kind of have been forced into tough shots, but that's specifically I watched Colorado State, and that was because Colorado State turned it into a 3-point shooting fest. And if you're going to turn the game into a 3-point shooting fest, New Mexico is probably not going to win that, but I don't think that's really San Diego State's style. So I think you put New Mexico at home. They're pretty evenly matched, but I'm going to give them the edge in a pretty low-scoring game, in my opinion. I don't know what the expected over-under is, but I don't think this gets too far into like the 70s, honestly. I think it's maybe a low 70s, high 60s game. Next up, Kentucky and Texas A&M. I'll take this one first again. I am going to go with Kentucky. I'm not saying this game will be uncompetitive, but did we overrate Texas A&M a little bit? They're 9-5 now. They got handled by LSU, which I talked about. I guess they don't really have bad losses, but no really good wins either, or not a lot of them at least. And then those FAU and UVA games were looking like quality losses, maybe not so much anymore. I simply just don't believe that much in the Aggies. I think we overrated them a little bit, and I'm very high on Kentucky. So maybe matchup-wise it gets competitive with A&M at home, but I think Kentucky's better enough where I trust them to win anyway.
Yeah, Kentucky's only had 2 away games this season against Power 6 opponents. They've won them both. Obviously, the Florida game just this past weekend, Kentucky edging out the win over the Gators. I think this one's going to be a different story, though. Obviously, it was a close win against the Gators that could have gone either way. Let's not forget that this is a freshman-heavy Kentucky team. Texas A&M is the exact opposite. This is a team built on seniors and experience, and I think they see themselves here with an opportunity to knock off a top-ranked team at home and kind of remind people who they are, if that's truly what this Aggies team is. Because, Dan, I agree with you. This team is not playing overly well. But let's also look at the losses real quick that the Aggies have had. I mean, you're talking about single-digit losses to FAU, Memphis, Houston. Obviously, they played pretty terrible against LSU, also got handled on the road to Virginia, only scored 47 points. So from a sense, yes, a little bit overrated, but from another sense, I still think this is a tournament team, and I think they're looking at this as an opportunity that they can't pass by.
I think I had the opposite takeaway from that Florida game that you did, Matt. I think Kentucky proved a lot to me, right? That's a game that a lot of young Kentucky teams have lost, especially in the past 4 years-ish, right? But for them to go on the road and beat the Gators in the way that they did, really, I think, showed me a lot about that Wildcat team. And for that reason, I'm going Kentucky with Dan here. In addition, I just can't overlook, I can't just wipe away the fact that Texas A&M lost by 15 at home to LSU, right? That's just a real bad loss. LSU is probably the worst team in the league at this point. And to have that on their resume at this time. The experience and Wade Taylor and the big guys down low don't outweigh it for me. Give me Kentucky by a fair amount here on the road.
All right, and then finally we got Oklahoma at Kansas. We'll throw it to Matt first for this one.
I can do this in like less than 10 seconds. Allen Fieldhouse, Kansas over Oklahoma. On to the next one.
Yeah, that's also my reasoning. Kansas just doesn't lose at home, particularly to these type of teams. We've seen Oklahoma. We've seen like these darlings come through the Big 12 a lot and then finish, 8-10 or whatever. I think Oklahoma is probably one of these teams. Not saying they'll finish 8-10, but these types of teams don't win at Allen Fieldhouse. Give me the Jayhawks at home.
Yeah, I'm picking Kansas as well. I'm interested to see what the spread is because depending on what it is, I might actually lean more towards Oklahoma against the spread because Kansas has really been playing with their food lately. But I think if we're picking this game outright, gotta go Jayhawks. Clearly the better team. And that does it for today's edition of the CBB Review Studio podcast. Thanks everyone for following along, for watching and listening here on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, wherever you found us. Be sure to follow us on our social medias, which has been scrolling along the bottom of the screen all episode at CBB Review on everything there. Once again, thanks again for watching and listening, and take care.